I see that many of you are holding malas. That's really good. If you can chant for 1,000 times a day, that's really not difficult. It's not too much. Of course, when you're making aspirations, it is similar to make a budget planning. Just like there are people who are buying a car or houses, they're calculating the mortgage and the repayment based on their now salary. But later, their salary could change, their job's situation could change, and then at that time, maybe they don't have the capacity to pay back the mortgage anymore, and then they would suffer and they would be under tremendous amount of stress. Similarly, as practitioners, when we do the budget planning of our practice time and of our time in practicing virtue, we tend to make plans in certain ways that is not necessarily practical. It happens to me when I make the plans for my translation projects. The planning looks good and my wishes are good, but the outcome may not necessarily be exactly as what I planned for, and it is just normal. But I think what we need to do is to cultivate a sense of time management. There are people who tend to speak beautiful words, but in terms of their action, their actions do not match to their words or promises. They're Khenpos and Khenpos or ordinary practitioners. Maybe at the beginning they're all similar, but after many years, day after day, we can see because of their different activities throughout the day or different time management throughout the day, the outcome would be very different. I do not want to be too extensive at the beginning, so I should probably stop here. Now let us continue with the actual text, which is the mantra of Padmasambhava, especially the function and representation or meanings of each syllable. We practice so much of the Padmasambhava mantra, Avalokiteshvara mantra, but we usually would only understand the mantra from the perspective of, I'm practicing the Padmasambhava mantra, therefore I'm going to receive the blessings of Padmasambhava. But we don't really know what each syllable represents or what they meant. We may be rather quite foreign to the meaning of those. But I think in this text, the teaching is quite concise and right to the point. So I think it's a great teaching. Now, Dakini Yeshitsogyo asked Padmasambhava, saying that now Lady Tsogyo stated to Padmasambhava, saying that, a great master, thank you for telling us about such infinite benefits and powers. You have been immensely kind. Although the explanation of the benefits and powers of the syllables of Guru Padma's mantra is unfathomable, for the sake of sentient beings in the future, I humbly ask you to give us a brief description, she asked. Now there are immense power within each of the syllable of Padmasambhava, but without your explanation, we won't be able to understand it. So I humbly ask you, in order to benefit the sentient beings of the future, would you please give us a concise and a brief explanation? Yeshitsogyo is rather speaking of it or making a supplication of it in a way that is not as direct as Ananda in the Shrangama Sutra. The qualities and benefits of Padmasambhava mantra is really vast. And she said that it would be really wonderful if you can give the Dharma teachings on each of the syllable, the meaning of each of the syllables. That would be really wonderful, but they must be quite vast and really long. For that reason, would you please give us the teaching on it? Because there are great masters who wrote the benefits and the qualities of the Padmasambhava mantra for a few volumes. That is why it is important to have a concise teaching. Padmasambhava then said that Om Benza Guru Padmasambhava, Benza Guru Padmasambhava. The benza is more of Amdo dialect, but you can chant it whichever way that you've studied. But we would usually write it in such a way, Om Benza Guru Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava then said that, "O noble daughter, the Vajra mantra is not only my essential mantra, it is the life essence of the deities of the 4 classes of tantra, the 9 vehicles." The 4 classes of mantra includes the Kriya, Charya, Yoga, and the Anu Yoga. Also, the mantra represents the 9 yanas as well. The 9 yana includes the Shravaka yana, the Pratika Buddha yana, the Bodhisattva yana, Kriya Charya, and then Yoga, then Maha Anu Ati, and Maha Ati Yoga. Maha Anu Adi Yoga. These 9 yanas, this is the core of the 9 vehicles. Also, the 84,000 aspects of the Dharma and so on, the heart essence of all the Buddhas of the 3 times, the lamas, deities, dakinis, Dharma protectors, and the like is encompassed by this mantra. The reason for this is as follows: listen well and hold this in your heart. Recite this mantra, write it, tell it to sentient beings in the future. When we are studying it, we can see that this is rather a very condensed version of the teaching, and this is an explanation with rather very condensed meaning, a condensed explanation. People may wonder, well, out of the 12 syllables, since all of these teachings within Tantra as well as all of the 84,000 Dharma doors is included, then do I need to chant any other mantras? Can I just chant the Padmasambhava mantra then? Well, you could, but sometimes because of people's different capacity and their different inclinations, there are different inclinations to different aspects of the Dharma. That is why there are people who would more lean towards the Avalokiteshvara mantra or the Vajrasattva mantra, and so on and so forth. There are people who would say that, well, I can just chant the Amitabha mantra because it has so much great merits. And there are people who would say that I can chant so-and-so mantra, it would be good enough for me. Of course, all of these mantras would be sufficient to the beings who made close connections to them, auspicious connections to them. In fact, the teachings that's given by Shakyamuni Buddha can be summarized into 3 short sentences. Do not practice vice, practice all virtue, and purify one's own mind. This is the teaching by all the Buddhas. So if you can practice virtue, not practice vice, and tame your own mind, this is the teaching that is taught by all the Buddhas. But does that mean that you do not need to listen to the 84,000 Dharma doors? It is not necessary, because everyone's capacity and their foundations and their inclinations are very different. Though that we can say that theoretically we don't need to necessarily listen to other teachings, but it is not necessarily that everyone would be able to be tamed by simply one teaching. That is why over here Padmasambhava says that I'm going to give you teachings on it, and I hope that you can listen to it closely, listen to it with attentive attention. Now, when you are looking at the mantras, you can write it, you can recite it, and you can even chisel it on the rock. In such a way, people would be able to make connections to this mantra. When I was little, I made lots of auspicious connections to Padmasambhava mantra as well as money mantra. So I used to write it as well as chisel it on the rock. I tend to do that at all times whenever I have time. And then in front, at the very front of the gate of Doma Monastery, because Doma Monastery has an auspicious connection to the Good Aeon Sutra, that is why I specifically make sure that we have a whole pile of money rocks chiseled with the money mantra as well as the Padmasambhava mantra. I have great devotion to the Padmasambhava mantra and the Avalokiteshvara mantra. I've made some very special connections to these two mantras. There are some stories with the two pieces of money mantra carving on rocks that's being placed right in front of the gate of Doma Monastery. I don't think I will tell you the story. I don't know if I'll ever tell you the story of it, but I definitely had a very special connection to these two particular carvings of money mantra. In Tibet, we have lots of chiseled rocks. Some of those are carved by others, and some of them are spontaneously manifested. The ones that's chiseled on the rocks, there are the ones that's been blessed or consecrated by great masters, lamas, and monastics. There are all kinds of the money mantra rocks. For people without faith, they probably don't believe it. But whatever it may be, Padmasambhava said that he specifically gave teachings to the sentient beings in future generation. That is why we're studying on this Padmasambhava mantra. Those of you who believe it, I don't need to convince you, and for those of you who don't believe it, I don't need to convince you either, because it is not to be convinced. Trust or belief is something that is lacking in this world. Even within a family, people would argue over whether you believe in me or not, especially when it comes to love relationships. The spouses would constantly argue over whether you trust me or not, isn't it? So I think in terms of having faith or trust in the power of Padmasambhava mantra, the belief or the understanding sometimes is beyond our conceptual mind. And there are different levels of blessings and powers. For those people without faith, if you don't believe it, I understand it, because we have different. We grew up in different environments, in different educational backgrounds, and we carry different baggages of our past karma. So there are lots of intertwined, complex causes and conditions for each person. That is why I think it's understandable if you don't believe it. But I truly think if you can chant the mantra of Padmasambhava, you would notice the difference. That is why we can just simply practice the Padmasambhava mantra. A few days ago, when I give teachings on the virtuous speech of the beginning, middle, and end, I think it was a very successful teaching, because many people felt that their mind stream has changed and their practice has changed and so on. especially many of you have developed faith to the Mani mantra, to the Avalokiteshvara mantra, especially because we studied the Liberation Sutra of Liberation as well as the Baskets Display Sutra, and it was very successful. If your mind has changed because of that, then your mind stream has been moistened or has been nourished by these teachings. Otherwise, if these teachings are not taken into your practice, and you can only become more stubborn. This time, other than listening to the benefits of the Padmasambhava mantra, I really hope that each of you could carry this teaching to your practice so that you can truly gain benefits and truly gain the blessings of the three roots. Even if not face to face, sometimes the insights and experiences could arise in your dreams. And you can be more in sync with the deity. If we can wholeheartedly pray and supplicate to the deity, then for lifetimes we will not generate any wrong views. If we were to practice in such a way, we can have great powers in benefiting sentient beings and propagate the Dharma. You can truly carry those experiences rather than only listening to the theories. If you practice wholeheartedly on the, for example, seven-line prayer and so on, if you were to practice with faith, then insights and experiences would naturally arise, and the deity would naturally take care of you, to grant blessings to you, and that is absolutely going to happen. Just like the moon in the space, it will be reflected in the different vessels that's on the ground. Doesn't matter how many vessels that you have in the ground that contains clear water, will reflect the moon. Similarly, if we were to supplicate wholeheartedly, then we would definitely be able to receive the benefits of the deities. When we studied the view of Vajrayana in the Gyuragarbha Tantra, where it says that let it be the mantra itself or the sound of Padmasambhava or whatever kinds of mantra you're thinking of, in fact, they are no different than the deity. If we can practice in such a way, if we uphold such a supreme view that is of equanimity and purity, is non-dual, then Padmasambhava will come to you. Just as how a child at times of calling the mother, they would naturally show up.